Okay. Okay. We are going on live. Without much ado. This is 67, right? 67 PSL on COP28. And as it happened in Dubai. And Jayaraman was there personally. And he was part of the technical delegation to COP28 from India. And of course, he is associated with MSSRF as a different here. But Jayaraman is a friend for the past, I don't know, 45 years. Yes. Something like that. 45. When I was a student, he was also a student, Nitin was a student. We all used to have great fun, enjoying, fighting, various things that we did together. And then I moved to some other place after finishing. We moved to another place.
2 years, it will be 15 years.
Right. So after that, we again met in Institute of Mathematical Sciences as a faculty. That was in 91. And he continued, we both continued together till 2005. And then he moved to Tata Institute of Adaption Research. He's expert on particle physics, immediate physics, quantum physics, string theory, and these things. Then he moved to Tata Institute for some activities, sabbatical. Then from there, he shifted himself to a new area, which is, you can say, the issues about climate change and other issues, to Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So he was there till his retirement of superannuation. And then now we have moved back to his hometown, which is Chennai, in MSSR, who is there. And I continued for some more time in math science. And then after that, I was associated with CMI, and then now I'm associated with here. That's how our lines, what they call the in physics, the lines are going, particle lines are going. This is what is there. Now we are getting in here to talk about climate change. So he will speak to us for about 45 minutes.
Yes.
45 minutes. But we are 45 minutes. And then there will be question and answer session. And we plan to have question and answer session for the maximum of 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, maximum of 30 minutes. At that time, I have to say enough. And of course, you can ask your questions by email or through things to many of us, and we will forward it to you. At some stage, it will be updated with answers. That's what happens in other lectures also. Now I request my friend Jayaraman to take that.
Thank you.
Can you remove the chair?
Yes, please.
Let's see. Is it working?
It should be.
It's working.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much for this invitation. So, English, my Tamil is in very bad shape. It used to be slightly English is fine. I think we can manage. I wish I could speak in Tamil as well, but unfortunately, that I am out of practice very badly. So I can probably do better in Hindi than I can do in Tamil, but then you have to communicate everything. Actually, to this audience, I must tell you about my shift to Tata Institute of Social Sciences. One of the reasons I shifted to Tata Institute of Social Sciences was a very brilliant director of that institute. who was there, who had studied and become assistant professor there. At the time that I shifted there in 2006, he was the director. His name was S. Parasuram. A very brilliant man. And I think I must say of the people who have influenced me in my attitude towards teaching and science and society. There are many who have had an influence, but he was a very inspiring influence. So, some point on some other occasion, we should talk about his legacy. He began as a physicist. He did the BSc in physics from Sotubode. And then he moved all the way to Mumbai because you can't, it's very difficult to do social sciences undergraduate or postgraduate in the opportunities in Chennai and Tamil Nadu are very limited. He went to Pune, studied anthropology and demography. He became a brilliant head of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences with his main specialization was social work. But following that, he became how to do social welfare in a developing country like India. So he was very brilliant. So under his leadership, there was a lot of room in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So we were able to create a postgraduate program in climate change, which was very interdisciplinary. So it was, we were very flexible. So if you came with a BA degree, you got an MA degree. So if you came with a BSc degree, your degree was called MSc. So in climate change and sustainability studies, and the program is still functioning. It's changed a little bit because after all our time changes, but it was a very good place where we were able to create a new generation of truly interdisciplinary work. What is interdisciplinary means, So it's not always very clear. So it is sometimes, physicists talk about other issues in physics language and they call it interdisciplinary. In a sense, that is true. Perhaps what you need is the correct word which ecologists use is transdisciplinary. It is that it requires in the techniques and understanding of several disciplines to deal with it. And climate change is really a subject of that kind. So, see, Govindarajan mentioned Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So, I really wanted to recall someone about whom on some other occasion perhaps we should talk about that experience. Anyway, so I was at COP28 and this is partly a tamasha, this is true. When you have 100,000 people attending anything, not all of them are it's an abbreviation for Conference of Parties. 192 plus countries are signatories to an international treaty, okay, called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, so every year, since COP3, before that there were gaps, but since COP3 it meets every year, except for the pandemic in 2020, a year was skipped. So this COP, the Conference of Parties, okay, is the highest decision-making body of the treaty. So the treaty has to be implemented. So the countries get together and decide or try to talk about the issue, how to take action. And why is it that this is particularly important? So as we have come to recognize already from the experience of the United Nations, we live in an interconnected world. So many issues, whether it is food and agriculture, whether it is science and culture, or whether it is education, or whether it is health, or even going back earlier, whether it is meteorology, all of these require international cooperation. So without international cooperation, we cannot carry out these activities. Some of it is essential coordination, like in wireless, air transport, maritime transport, etc. Coordination is important. Others are more in the nature of trying to make a better world, more peaceful world, hopefully, because we are not being particularly successful on that one. We have to try harder, I would say. But nevertheless, this is very important. So very often there is the first thing I want to tell you is, very often there is a feeling that, oh, all this is a waste of time. We must work locally with community. But, forget all this, getting common people, etc. This is completely the wrong. I think this is very mistaken. So, for instance, if you have the WTO, the World Trade Organization, every farmer knows in this country that the agreements that we sign under agriculture with the WTO will affect the farmers, will affect you. So if, this year your crop is large or small, is high or low, etc., depending on the world market, you can be affected. So it is not as if, the global aspect does not affect the local in all kinds of ways. But there is one more way in which it is very important, and climate change is very special, because the emissions which take place anywhere can affect the entire globe. So the impact may be local. Whatever happens, of course, happens to us as individuals or as communities or as countries, wherever we are. But the reason it happens is because you get a lot of impact from things happening elsewhere. So intrinsically, it is a global problem. Okay? And like most global problems, like most global problems, there is behind it what you might call, behind this global problem, as always, whenever there is a global problem, especially a problem which deals with natural resources, behind this there is something what you might call a global common. A global common is some aspect of our earth that in some a resource, if you wish, that belongs to all of humanity. Okay, because there are no boundaries. It is not particular to X, Y, or Z or some particular country or community. But nevertheless, this resource is, is finite. And so if one person uses it unfairly, then it takes away from what the other person will get as their due share. So these are all commons. Okay. There is another thing which is called public good. A public good is something which benefits everybody. And if I use it, okay, does not mean other people cannot benefit. Nobody is blocked. So the most common example that people will give you is lighthouses or street lights. So, if it shines, if you benefit from it, it does not stop someone else from benefiting from it. So but commons is different, and the most common example of a commons is actually grazing. So if you have some grazing land near a village, and suppose there is 20 acres of it of grassland. So if I bring 20 cows and somebody else brings 200 cows, and there is no mechanism of how to share it in a equitable fashion, in a fair manner, however you define fair. But if there is no way of sharing it in a fair manner, then obviously there is going to be a problem. In our country, we know it with water resources. Water is not indefinite. Of course, we have the sea, but that water is not directly usable. So water resource is a finite resource. So if someone opens the tap and keeps the tap open all the time, and then you say, no, water you have to save, etc., etc. But nobody is checking or controlling how much you save water. Then, there are people who are well-to-do, there are people who are not well-to-do, there are people who live in houses, there are lawns, there are hotels, there are five-star hotels, there are one-star hotels. So everybody uses water in a different way. But water is a common resource. So how do you deal with it? So commons, dealing with the commons is one of the real hassles, real problems in dealing with natural resources. And climate change is a commons problem par excellence. It is the most severe problem of its kind that we know. So the way this commons was realized was not realized directly. The idea vaguely that it was a commons was around, but now in the last 10, 12 years, we have a precise idea of how to think of the commons in scientific terms with regard to climate change. Okay. Now, of course, I am making a somewhat more complicated story simpler, but it will do for our purpose. So this common, earlier it used to be called the atmospheric commons, meaning if you see what is global warming? Global warming is, see, people call it climate change. The correct term for it is global warming of anthropogenic origin. So it is not due to natural causes. It is global warming created by human activity using fossil fuels or otherwise releasing greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, which is the cause of warming. That is the problem we are interested in. Okay. The fact that it is called climate change and not global warming was done 30 years ago to keep the United States happier. Okay, so as like all these things, you have to listen to the biggest power on the block. So what about global warming? So how does global warming arise? Global warming arises by these greenhouse gases being emitted to the atmosphere. And once the greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere, they will lead to warming. There is a cycle of absorption of these gases. The most prominent greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide is part of the carbon cycle. So this is the real paradox about global warming. The most important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, but carbon dioxide, okay, is also part of the carbon cycle and therefore essential to life. That is one part of the story. The second part of the story is that all our advances to modern living that we have had, and for the first time, the first person to notice it, of course, was Marx, but other thinkers after him have also come to this realization that the scientific and industrial revolution offers us the first time the possibility of satisfying or more than satisfying the needs of all humanity on this planet. And our ability to withstand the vagaries of nature, whether it is rain or storm or thunder or lightning or cyclones, etc., all have arisen from these abilities that we acquired in the scientific and industrial revolution. But unfortunately, this is this boat that has allowed us to rise and navigate, uh, waters of nature, so to speak. That is precisely the one which is endangered by global warming. So that is the fundamental contradiction which we have to deal with. Now, all this seems very far from COP. So all this were you discussing at COP? COP you don't discuss philosophy. So, but this background is, I think, essential. Many things happened at the conference of parties, many issues are discussed. So I am not going to go into the entire lot of discussion. I am going to stay focused only on the part about which is in the title, namely fossil fuel challenge. And there is one critical paragraph in that agreement, but to understand which we require the background. And so this is why I am starting where I am. So how do you think of this commons, this global commons, which is associated with greenhouse gases? So in the last 10, 12 years or 15 years, what we have is the idea of the global carbon budget. So what is interesting is that there is a fairly clear relationship up to some uncertainty because it is atmosphere and this is not like a physics experiment with mechanics in a lab. So it's a complicated system. So there is some high, substantial uncertainty, but nevertheless, up to uncertainty, there is a linear relationship, direct proportionality between the cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in particular, and the rise in global temperature. Now, global temperature is not something you get by looking at the thermometer, okay, outside. Obviously, because summer to winter, so much range is there. So it is an average quantity. And currently, we have increased because of human activity. We have increased the temperature, average temperature of the Earth, 1.1 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial level. Because industrial revolution is where temperature increase really started. So how does that happen? That happens because, and as a result, what has happened is, because we know that there is a direct proportionality between cumulative emissions, the total emissions over time, and the temperature increase. If you want to restrict the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, then the amount of emissions that can take place of carbon dioxide is limited. And this limit is called the global carbon budget. Okay, this is the commons. It is like, say, if you have 20 acres of grassland, similar to that, you have so many tons, actually billion tons in science, we call it gigatons of carbon dioxide. You can do it for both 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. So 2 degrees, you get a bigger budget. 1.5, you get a smaller budget. You can look up the climate equity monitor. Okay, we'll put this on later, maybe on the slide or so. It's a website which we run at MSSRF, which gives you a simple introduction to this concept. So this down on chemical fertilizer, there was chaos. And Sri Lanka has suffered very badly. Sikkim can declare itself a organic fertilizer area, but that is because the government is watching very carefully, and whenever there is a shortage of vegetables in Gangtok, they get it from Jalpaiguri in West Bengal. So that you can manage, but otherwise you cannot simply stop economies halfway. So there is an issue, so you have to share. Okay, so this is the story, but where are we with regard to the carbon budget for 1.5? Unfortunately, what has happened is 4/5 of this budget is exhausted. So the question is, has it been exhausted by everybody using it equally in an equitable or fair fashion? Answer is no. So, like the story of the bear and Goldilocks, I don't know if you read English nursery stories, you will recognize the story. So, the question is, who ate up my carbon budget? Okay. So this is the story. So, all developed countries until 1990, well, pre-industrial period, we say 1850. So 1850 to, you have to have a date, some benchmark is 1850. So 1850 to 1990, they have used 71% of the total cumulative emissions has been there. And the rest of the world, 29%. So now, if you look at the period after 1990, it seems like the developing countries, the share is larger. But if you take China out of it, we are back to that 29-28%. Okay. So what is the story? So the question is, their share in the population is 18% today. So we can take that as a benchmark. So 18% of the world has used somewhere, if you take 71, 46, it comes out somewhere around 56%. The 18% of the world has used 56% of the carbon budget. So now the question is, you can argue, I didn't know. Unfortunately, they have known from 1990 for sure. And even then, they have not taken action. Many people don't realize, if you look at the text of the original United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the idea was that by 2000, in 10 years from 1990, emissions were reduced by 20% by the rich countries. That is there somewhere. It is roughly mentioned in the convention itself, Article 4.2 or something like that. So they did. The United States emission kept rising until 2005. The European Union together, its emissions were decreasing, but that started in 1970 for other reasons. But nevertheless, even in that period, it was substantially high and much lower than what they could have done. So then, even if you look at developed countries, the developed countries as a whole, I said, they have emitted only 46%. But if you look at the developed countries, that includes the former Soviet Union and former Eastern Europe. All their economies collapsed in 1990. They had severe crisis. So if you look at just the Western nations, quote unquote, or OECD countries, their emissions are even more disproportionate. Yes.
I've not understood this slide. Can you go with it for me?
So, okay, I have slurred over the fact that there is
the sum and substance?
The sum and substance is okay. When you count GHG greenhouse gas emissions, you do it whether sometimes you do it inclusive of whether it comes from land use change, and forestry. This LULUCF is the acronym for that. So from human disturbance of natural wealth, forests, etc., the biosphere, or and the other part is purely industrial, fossil fuels, cement production, etc. So we typically present both figures, but what I have done is to separate the developed countries into the OECD countries and the former Soviet bloc countries.
What is 419? What does it stand for?
Gigatons. Gigatons of carbon dioxide. Oh, cumulatively. Okay, sorry. So as a result, if you look at the world, you can think of it in terms of carbon debt and carbon credit. So what has happened? So if you look at India in both these periods, India, if you look at its population share, we have a carbon credit. Okay? And 192 gigatons, billion tons up to 1990, and 138 up to in this other period. China has caught up in this period, but that is they are making up for what they lost earlier. Okay. Then you look at the United States, it's the biggest demand. So the United States roughly has 5% of the global population, and it has steadily consumed and will continue to consume, even with their current promises, roughly 25% of the global carbon budget, up to net zero.
Why have you put Germany as well as EU separately?
Just to show that even individual countries have a lot to answer for, but they are all together as EU, so we use that accounting on other. It's a bit of duplication, but just to illustrate. Okay, so you can convert this into money. They all talk of carbon trading now. No?
What is Russian Federation? Previous slide.
If you look at Russian Federation, of course, they have been enormously coal intensive. So Russian Federation was, can we say, always had a problem. Even by 92, of course, by the time the treaty came, the regime had changed in Russia, and more or less their behavior on this issue matches that of the developed countries. No difference. Despite their friendship on other issues. So now you can convert this into money, and you can take some estimate. Basically, there is no real benchmark, $50 per ton or $30 per ton or $100 per ton. So in one way of estimating, whatever way you do it, just $30 per ton, the developed countries owe the rest of the world $30 trillion. Okay, this is not a small number. So now this story about net zero. I'm going slower than I intended, but you have to get the background. So this net zero story, now you remember 2 years ago before COP26, everybody said net zero, net zero, net zero. So what is the story of net zero? I told you this is like a commons, and I gave you this idea that it is like saying how much water can you use, who will use water. Now net zero is like saying I will do net zero by 2050. Is that you go and ask your neighbor, you don't take too much water because you're in an apartment block, your tank has only a capacity, and I am in 2A, my neighbor in 2B is using too much water, and I say, you don't use too much water, use your fair share. And my neighbor said, no, I need water. I will cut down my use of water. I can promise you by 8 o'clock I'll turn off the water. What use is it? It is not very useful. You have to tell me how much water will you use. Instead of telling me how much water I will use, I will say I will start reducing my use of water, and then eventually at 8 o'clock I turn off my tap. And then you say all of you must also agree. See, I have been very careful. I have hardly used water. And then you tell me, you can use water, but I will start reducing by 12 o'clock. You start reducing by 1 o'clock. And by 8 o'clock, all of us must stop using the water. So obviously, my neighbor is using far more water than I am using. And he has taken care of his needs plus extra, whereas I may not have enough water even for my basic needs. This is the story of net zero. So obviously, India cannot say we won't do net zero. Everybody will say, oh, you are against the safety of the planet. So we said 2070, but the whole problem is, if you allow the US and EU with their current, promises of what they will do, they will use up 25 to 30% of the remaining carbon budget, of which only 1/5 remains from the total. This is the setting in which we go to negotiate. And net zero meaning because you can absorb it, and there are emissions, so you can plant trees and absorb. So typically you talk of it as net zero. There are other stories there which I will not go into. So now there is a series of slogans which start coming, okay, from the developed countries. So there, a lot of this you have heard about in the media. So one of the things is all countries must peak their emissions by 2025, and all the global emissions, annual emissions, must reduce to 43% below 2020 levels by 2030. This was the slogan before COP. Okay. So the question is, where does this 40? Unfortunately, there are a whole series of mathematical models of how to go about emissions reduction, which have been made, but all of them, because of the kind of economic theory and other assumptions they make, all of them are built on the assumptions that those who use less energy will use even less, and those who use a lot more energy than the others will slowly reduce their consumption. So it's based on a fundamentally unequal proposition. So why this has happened is a long story. It has to do with the nature of how climate science, especially climate economics, actually works, including in the IPCC. But that is the upshot of this 43%. Yes.
I will ask the question at the end.
Yeah. So in all these scenarios, and my colleague Tejal Kanetkar and I have spent a lot of time really digging this out. You can see, there used to be an old DMK slogan which said, from the days of the anti-Hindi agitation, which said, so this is exactly what it is, except that it is global south and global north. And if you really look at the numbers that they have produced, it will be really be and in fact, it is amazing that they expect Africa to reach in all these models, which give you this famous 43%. They assume that Africa must reach a net zero before North America or Europe. And what is the state of Africa's energy consumption? The average energy per capita of 6 to 8 African countries are below the average energy consumption per year of an American refrigerator. So we have a world which is enormously unequal, where development is not taken care of for a huge part of the global population. Roughly 50% of the world population emits only 13 to 15% of total emissions, and the majority of them earns less than $3 per day per person. Okay. So in this scenario, can we do, how is it that you cannot have a burden, which is, how can you have any equal distribution of responsibility? So that is why the UNFCCC has what you call common but differentiated responsibilities. Similarly, are there alternate scenarios possible? Yes, it is possible, but this requires the developed countries to cut much more rapidly than they are doing now. Okay. So this is a little bit like this, if the food is limited, to give you another analogy, if the food is limited, then and there are 20 people or say 2,000 people to share the food. Some people are used to eating a lot, and some people are used to having one meal a day. Then you say it is easier for people who eat only one meal a day to have less food. Those who are eating a lot, in classical economic theory, this is referred to as Pareto optimality. Okay, and I am not kidding. And even Amartya Sen has written about this. This is like I used to say, if you have to have a hunger strike, you should get the poor people to do the hunger strike. They are happy anyway, morning to evening, you don't eat. Poor naal one hour. There is no problem. So this is unfortunately, this logic of inequality is what drives a huge amount of climate economics, both within the country, outside the country, and now when you talk of carbon trading in agriculture, etc., this is what is happening within the country as well. I'll take care of that in question. So what happened at COP28? So before that, this speaking, I have emissions, I have told you the story. You just remember my story of sharing water with the neighbor. Next. Next. This is the other one, which is the famous slogan at COP28. We must triple renewable energy by 2030. The capacity, okay? So it is not the actual electricity usage in terms of kilowatt hours, but the capacity, how much installed capacity is there. So what do you see? Demand is growing only in developing countries, because this is where demand is there, because people don't have enough energy. And India's energy used per capita is actually pathetic. Okay, it is not when we, and in fact, if you take India alone, how much we have contributed to global warming, our contribution to cumulative emission is less than 4%. Is all of South Asia, according to IPCC, and 4% South Asia is 25%, 24% of global population. We have not even polluted the to our credit. But whatever it is, we are not responsible. So people who think that India will become Vishwaguru, India will show the world how we will do global warming, we are not even responsible for the problem. So if you shut off all emissions in India today, we contribute about what, 2 point something gigatons. You can shut off for 20 years. Our thing, we will save 1 year worth of global emission. So we don't count. Especially, and you will put at the same time 18% of the global population, which is our population, to untold heart. Okay, so that's the thing. So renewable energy, what should happen? Those who have huge fossil fuel capacity, like Europe, United States, etc., will they replace their capacity with renewable energy? Or are they going to depend on us, our excess, to make up this entire global triplet? So there are a set of numbers. So if this is the current capacity, as it is, if you look at the top four, the top three out of the four are developing countries. So how can you triple? Where is China going to triple from 1,200? What the US should do is actually back. What the US should do is to phase out its fossil fuel capacity. Then it can add 1,500 or more gigawatts of capacity. So the question is, whenever you have a global target, in fact, India has declared a global target of 500 gigawatts by 2030 of renewable energy capacity. The US has not given an absolute number. This is the fact. They have estimates based on how their procedures and their current laws will act on the market and reach the target they want. And in that background, they may reach some number, but they have not promised us any numbers. So that takes us to what happened at COP28, the famous fossil fuel ban. So can we go forward? So this energy efficiency, we can talk about it later. Move. So just at COP, there were two items. There was actually one big item on the agenda. So after the UNFCCC from 2015, we had this thing called the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement was supposed to be regularly reviewed. Okay, and that is part of its mechanism. Every 5 years, you see what is the performance. All countries make only voluntary commitments. There is no compulsory commitment. And so you put everything together and you see whether we are doing enough to solve the problem of climate change. So now the obvious answer is we are not. But the question is, who is doing how much and according to what of their capacity, how much of their capacity they are doing. So the word for it is differentiation. One is equitable. Our share must be equitable, and our share must be equitable based on our responsibility. How much? It's not a question of sharing the burden. Common but differentiated responsibility is not a careless word. It is now, especially today, it has become a very important word in international law. So you must use that word with due respect. Like when you write a contract, when you say whether it is stamped, the words in the contract for buying a house, the way you treat those words with respect. Similarly, common but differentiated responsibility is a legal term in international law, and we must take it seriously. So differentiation is important. So the United States, European Union, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc., say no, we don't want to talk about it. We try to remove those words. Luckily, they didn't succeed because all the other countries say, this is a game of pressure and counter pressure. So, you push on some things, you say it's very important, I won't let go. So then the other side decides that, okay, maybe we shouldn't press so hard. And maybe in practice we can get around it. So similarly, we managed to keep the importance of equity and differentiation. Next. And the very important thing which we did, which was already done in the G20 statement, that when peaking and this 43% reduction of emissions by 2030 were talked about, this very important phrase, based on global modeled pathways and assumptions, was inserted into the language. So this is very important because these, as I have already explained to you, these considerations are not based on equity. Next. Pass on. This is some work which we did. So here is the famous paragraph. So this is what we fought, all the countries fought over for 4 days, throughout the day, throughout the night, through many meetings, going back and forth. Okay. So what is the issue? The issue is the developed countries will not recognize the question of a fair share of the global carbon budget. They didn't want the carbon budget at all at one point. But India and other big developing countries told them that would be absurd because the carbon budget is the most important concept coming out of the whole of IPCC 6 assessment report. So you will look very foolish if you say you don't want it. So they had to keep it in. But who ate up the carbon budget? Of course, they didn't allow it to appear. So if that doesn't appear, then you have to make all kinds of adjustments. So India, for instance, will have no problem. If there is an agreement saying all countries will limit their use of fossil fuels so that they stay within their fair share of the global carbon budget. We have no problem. In fact, the Prime Minister said it on day one. In fact, in India's submission to the UNFCCC on its long-term strategy, this is clearly laid out. They have said it in black and white. But that, of course, they won't agree. So what they will do, they will target coal. Coal. Why do they target coal? Because actually, if you look at the numbers, 52 to 54%, give or take a bit, of total emissions, if you look by the fuel source, actually come from oil and gas. And it is only the remaining which is in coal. Coal is actually a mixed blessing. Is coal dirty? Yes, coal is dirty. But if you are underdeveloped and you want the lifestyle and cleanliness of a developed country, I'm sorry, that's going to be very difficult. This is a fact. The other thing about coal is that if you keep burning coal, coal does not burn efficiently. So it gives off a lot of aerosol. Okay, particulate matter, etc. And the net effect of this particulate matter, that part of it, not the carbon dioxide part, is actually a cooling effect which a little bit balances the carbon dioxide heating. So the shift to oil and gas, which happened in Europe and North America in the 60s especially, that has actually speeded up their contribution to warming because oil and gas burn very efficiently, much less particulate matter. So there is no cooling due to dust. 40 years ago, we used to talk of nuclear winter. So this is the problem. So
Also gives pollution.
but it certainly gives pollution. But you think pollution can be removed by flue gas desulfurization or using not importing Australian coal, but for your that's a complicated story. But the IPCC itself has made clear that the goal of reducing emissions from coal and the role of reducing pollution from coal burning are not the same. Okay, so that is the point to keep in mind. Though there is a lot of people trying to convince us, especially India, that it is in fact the same. We have to convince China. Basically, they say, please go away. Here we are more open and there is more flexibility in discussion. So there is much more pressure on India in this case. So how do we deal with this? So you will see here first that the language is very important. So the language says in earlier versions they had should or could then etc. We were fighting over it. So somebody cleverly said no should, no could, simply contribute. So we don't know how you contribute. So what does this do? This leaves us open. So we can say we will not exceed our fair share of the global carbon budget, but it's up to you to stay within yours. The other very important thing is that all fossil fuels have appealed. India has been not against all fossil fuels being mentioned with coal, but it was, our friends also have sometimes hard feelings over it, like Saudi Arabia. It doesn't want mention of oil, and China doesn't like mention of coal, etc. But in the push and pull and all various things that happen, eventually all fossil fuels are mentioned. And this is the contribution, just orderly and equitable. This is something to give them credit. The United Arab Emirates were the host of this COP. They had promised to be there. And this is something I'm sure India would have told them also, like China, that you cannot, that language is very important. Civil society internationally has always supported that idea. So in some sense, this is not a bad outcome. This does not guarantee that going forward life will be equitable or life will be pleasant. Because after this, all countries are supposed to upgrade their contribution under the Paris Agreement. And so there will be again a lot of pressure on India. Okay. And so all problems are not solved. But for the moment, I think we have reached the situation where there is some balance. There is this word phase down. Okay. In fact, it's a good thing here. It solves here is transitioning. There was a big debate whether phase down or phase out. Okay. But so somebody cleverly came up with transitioning, and very important, according to Bloomberg. These things you don't find out personally. According to Bloomberg, it's very important that Saudi Arabia agreed. And as a developing country, hugely dependent on oil and gas, their agreement on this is very significant. And according to Bloomberg, this was personally led by the topmost leadership of their government. So we have something here, I think, which is necessary, is far from sufficient. And that does it, you can look at the next slide. This is, I just spent 2 minutes on methane and then I will stop. This, of course, they keep saying fossil fuel subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies. In India, we are not, we don't give subsidies to people. First of all, India has some of the highest energy prices in terms of consumer use of energy. Okay. Our prices for fuel are extraordinary. Okay. Fuel producing countries have 1/3 of our fuel price. Okay. So this is number one. The second thing is as a result, partly, our energy use per capita is pathetic. And if we want to reach a developed country level, or at least some middle level of development, our energy use has to increase by a factor of 3 at the very least, or maybe even a factor of 4, our per capita use of energy. Okay. Now, there are various ways to justify this. We can talk about it on another occasion. So, when they come after us on subsidy, okay, this is as it is, we have withdrawn subsidy. All kinds of subsidies have been withdrawn. We have decontrolled for several years now the prices of petroleum products. Okay, coal does not get a subsidy. Coal happens to be cheap. That is a fact. So the way you do this of course is important thing. So we have established these two caveats: energy poverty and just transition, and perhaps is far more important to sub-Saharan Africa than it is to us. Okay. So all in all, I would say. So the next slide. What about methane? This is a old US thing. Okay, and they have still not got rid of it. The science is increasingly clear. There's a fundamental difference between carbon dioxide and methane. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years plus, minimum 1,000 years. In fact, you cannot talk of a reasonably of a half-life of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But the half-life, it's a chemical half-life, not radioactive half-life. Half-life of methane in the atmosphere is 20 years. So this equivalence between carbon dioxide and methane is a tricky story where there has been a lot of confusion. But now what has happened is we have New Zealand, which is a rich country, but its cows are responsible for a huge amount of methane. So under methane, there's a big debate inside New Zealand. And when a rich person has a problem, then the truth comes out. It does not happen when we have a problem. So now, because of extensive studies, you realize that there is a fundamental difference between carbon dioxide behavior and methane behavior. So when methane remains constant, it does not contribute to warming. And especially methane not from fossil fuel sources, but methane from agricultural sources is effectively a closed loop. Baji and I noticed this 10 years ago, but our gurus in climate change in India who proved it. Now, घर का मुर्गी दाल बराबर. Okay. So this is the situation. So with methane, I think we can take care of them. This debate is not going to die down on how exactly to account for methane. So, okay, methane, we would have preferred to avoid it, but earlier they wanted numbers. So those numbers are not there about how much you must reduce. So on the one hand, you can say, is this enough to take care of keeping 1.5 within reach? Answer is no. But I would add, not as an official spokesperson or anything, I would add that 1.5 is gone. Keeping 1.5, the carbon budget, we have eaten it up at the current rate of emissions in another 7-8 years in the research state. And there is no indication that we will act so drastically that we will stop it. So 1.5 is gone. In fact, that among the many things I disagree with my good friend Namaros, because this is one thing I agree with him on. So many people from different other viewpoints agree that this is not going to happen. 1.7, 1.8 is a possibility. If you look at the cumulative emissions, which are likely because of the Paris Agreement commitments up to 2030, 1.7, 1.8 is still a possibility. So that is something which we must work for. But what is the bottom line for a country like India? And this is very important to us everywhere, is that development is urgently important. Adaptation, next. Mitigation, third. Unfortunately, in Tamil Nadu, we got the story the other way. Now, I am not saying particularly the Tamil Nadu government, unfortunately, even the Kerala government seems to have the story the other way around, not completely, but partially. So, the whole idea that mitigation, somehow we will get net zero by 2050, etc., These are statements which are made without any serious idea of how to meet our development deficit. So if you ask me, is 1.8 degree more dangerous than 1.5, or is it the lack of development? And I would say it is the lack of development. Okay, so this is the lesson, and so this is a sort of account of COP28, not the way you see it in the media, obviously, but I think there are many ways in which civil society, I think, shares this viewpoint. Even global civil society from the United States share this thing. So I'll stop here. I'm terribly over time. So let me.
The wonderful presentation. Now we will start with questions. So you can raise your hand, whoever wants to ask, and I will take some sequence of people who will ask. How much time you are saying for questions? So total 30 minutes is what I have promised. Yes, Professor Matt.
I can go on longer, but I don't think the audience will be happy.
No, we can't.
Yeah, we're coming to
we have been here from
The takeaway as I see it is, if the advanced countries continue the way it is, it doesn't matter what we do, we are heading down the cliff.
I see, we are, I would say we are heading in the wrong direction. But the trouble is, all the cliff argument also comes from them.
No, I know that.
And
I'm saying that whatever we do is so minuscule, it doesn't matter.
No, the point is, perhaps I mean it differently. So there is a lot of talk, and you see who is the greatest voter of keeping 1.5 within reach. Mr. Alok Sharma, who was president of COP28. Unfortunately, because of the various geopolitics happening around, for a number of reasons, he was not even invited to COP28. Okay, he set up all the stuff for this argument. So the United States, Europe, the OECD countries, together, of course, with the island states, etc., you can understand, they are the most vociferous over 1.5.
No.
What I'm saying is, the projection of whether 1.5 is, as they call a tipping point, beyond which, very drastic things will happen, is, I think, of a reason. And I don't share the alarmism around 1.5 that is manifest in a lot of the comments. So there are two things. Are we, as a result of this, if the developed countries don't do what they should, are we headed in the wrong direction very much? Answer is yes. Because not only their emissions reduction, they also possess really the wherewithal to do anything about it. Money, technology, science, everything. However, is 1.5 really the cliff edge? Or is the cliff edge still farther away, and there is room for us to take care of development in a manner such we also avoid the cliff edge? I think the answer is yes, but we have to invest more intellectual resources in seeing how it should be done.
No, I think that's not what I'm saying. Our contribution is not as important as 1.5, 1.6, 1.4 is not the relevant point. To me, our contribution to either of these, all these three figures, will be insignificant compared to what the advanced countries will do.
Yes, that's okay.
Go ahead.
Hi. This is very enlightening in a different way. So I'm only asking this at the risk of being asking a very simplistic question. So all of this is at the policy level, but at individual levels, is it still useful for somebody living in India to think about living a gentler life in terms of wanting to leave a smaller, minimal carbon footprint? Is it even useful to think about it living in India? Should it be changing only, say, for example, I choose to migrate to the United States, then I give it a thought,
I think I understand your question. And, since I taught this business for now going on several years, 14 years, I think more than 15 years. So it's a fair question. I don't doubt the question. This is, if you want an analogy to illustrate the problem, this is like talking about unemployment. Is unemployment a problem that affects all of us? Answer is yes. What can you and I do about unemployment? One thing is, of course, we try to find new ways of getting jobs. We go for new skills. We don't do BA or you try to do something else. You maybe want to join a startup instead of something else. All that, you can do whatever jugaad you want, as they call it, in order to survive. But can you solve unemployment? And there is no. It requires political will, it requires economic policy, it requires the overall thing to happen. So climate change is very much like that. So can we take individual initiatives? I think yes. So, so frankly, if my daughter wants to cycle in Mumbai to work because she feels green, I'm going to pick up the phone and tell her no, because in Jammu, I don't think you should be cycling. Okay, so there will be all kinds of issues, but whatever it is, if people, for instance, there are innovative ideas in say, biology. Can we enable roots to sequester more carbon? Answer is yes. But then don't ask farmers to do your mitigation now. That's the difference. Okay. So I think there is room for initiative. There is room for doing all kinds of things. People's enthusiasm in this is justified and correct.
Going for vegetarian food.
That is a complete, I can't tell you how much I dislike that. And especially for us in our country, what is our last meal measured it, and it has not changed very much, given the figures that we see on calorie intake. What is our meat intake? Last we measured it was 4 kilograms per capita per day. What is the world average? 40 plus. What is the United States? And not just United States, China, wherever there is the general people's health has reached a certain threshold. They are very high. US is 90 plus last I saw, and now it must have crossed 100 per capita per year. We are 4 kilos. So I think vegetarianism is not a joke. That's a separate issue. In my opinion, it's also based on very simplistic economics. So that's my response to your question. Individual initiatives, yes, but you cannot depend on them for the systemic change which is required.
Go ahead, you ask us.
No, please.
Yeah. In reference to India, you were mentioning development, adaptation, and mitigation. So, what development? It's all about infrastructure, or how it is? That is one.
That's one.
Another question is, it's in relation to her question. So, I'm a climate change educator. I work with National Geographic. So, I have a curriculum.
You have a card for it.
So, that it really matters. I teach students on all these things, like, what to do, what not to do. Does it really matter for Indian students?
I would say, let me answer the first question. Infrastructure, answer is yes. So, for instance, if you want to withstand increased cyclonic storms, I think we need cement and concrete. That is a fact. And is there a way of producing cement and concrete without concurrent emission? No. So, in fact, a fair share of the remaining carbon budget is required not only for mitigation, but is also required for adaptation. So, the IPCC is, unfortunately, it doesn't come out in the outreach. IPCC is absolutely clear. All evidence points to the fact that in the next 20 to 25 years, Is the difference in mitigation levels the determining factor in reducing our vulnerability, or the level of social and economic development? And the answer is social and economic development. Okay, so infrastructure is part of it. Now, for instance, nobody wants a railway. There is this new bug about railway. But you don't have railways, what will people do? People have to move, people will use cars. So railways are much better than a highway. So now we are all gung-ho about electric vehicles, which are basically electric cars. And our old emphasis on public transport has gone out of the window. We should be going towards public transport. This is our future. So these are the issues. Okay, so infrastructure is necessary. We must do it more efficiently, but without infrastructure, not possible. About your other question about National Geographic, I'm sorry to say you have to write your own film. I wouldn't touch National Geographic. I wouldn't touch. Well, we have to establish the problem is we ourselves, our own scientists, and even in government, we are, our mind is occupied by a different narrative. When you say equity, everybody will say equity and CBDR are like a mantra. But when it comes to defending it in practice, in various ways, in policy making, in your own policy, etc., this is a problem. So, for instance, there is so much enthusiasm about carbon trading in agriculture in India. Why is it nobody has mentioned that not a single developed country has allowed carbon trading in agriculture? Why are we in such a rush? So these are, so I think invest in writing your own narrative. So this is my
regarding how the CO2 levels are measured. Now, a lot of consuming goods are made in China, as we all know, and they are consumed in the US and other countries. So, does the carbon produced that is taken in China's tab or the US tab?
See, so there are two ways of accounting. So there is a formal accounting process which all countries have agreed to. And this is one of the few things which comes in UNFCCC language in a decision with the word shall. Okay? So we shall, when they say you parties shall do this, you have to do it. Not that you are not going to go to a court of law, there is no international court like that. But you don't go against these things. You make an agreement, you keep. So there is a process of accounting called the GST inventory process, where your accounting is by production and territorial. Okay? Meaning whatever you produce, irrespective of whether you export it or not. Okay? So that is the first basis. However, this does not stop independent academy or even the host country or whoever to actually also account for exports and calculate what is called not the emission, but what is properly called the carbon footprint. Okay. So these are consumption-based emissions, or they are calculated taking this into account. And therefore, if you look at the IPC, Working Group 3 of the 6th assessment report, in the summary for policy makers, you will see a graph, okay, where the cumulative emissions is given, historic, and the current over since 1990, I think, or whatever, they have given also the production-based and consumption-based emissions.
So you said India doesn't contribute much to globally, it's confidence of us not having purchasing of us. Like US people can consume a lot more stuff. People are not started.
In some sense, that is true, but I would put it differently. Our inability to solve our development not purchasing capacity. But if you say, the காசு கொடுத்தா they will start polluting. So அவங்களுக்கு purchasing power எல்லாமே இருந்தா நல்லதுன்னா. That is what they are saying in the West. Those models I was talking about, that is exactly what they are saying. And even a good man, I think he is a good guy on climate change. I'll go. If you listen to Inconvenient Truth, he will say this: India and China are consuming more. 2008, when food prices rose across the world, George Bush immediately said, "Oh, in India and China, they are eating more." and we know what is our calorie consumption. Okay, so I think the argument should not be that this is like prohibition. No, அது அங்க வந்து சாராயங்களை இருக்கக்கூடாது, வெச்சா போய் குடிச்சிட்டோம். அது மாதிரி காசு வரக்கூடாது, கையில சம்பாத்தியம் வந்தாக்க they will start polluting the earth. We can't work like that. So I think we have to develop a sustainable lifestyle. We have no choice in a country like India, but that should be on the basis of a dignified life with well-being. We cannot be at mass poverty. Mass poverty cannot be our contribution to global sustainability.
The recent events like extreme, how far they will contribute to climate change?
That is
From 2015 onwards, we are seeing.
I see. Everybody is tempted to anecdote, and nobody will. And unfortunately, even scientists love anecdotal this thing. So Obama said, "I went to Greenland. I saw polar bears on ice floes." So everybody loves it. Nobody, see, people like you and me have not seen glacier falling into the Antarctic ocean from the Antarctic glacial landmass. So when you see National Geographic or Discovery Channel for the first time, and the huge ice floes dropping from the glacier, you wonder, it is actually melting away or what. But you don't know what was happening in 1950. You are not a student of it. No, you are not measured. So my point is, first thing is very important to avoid anecdotes. I can't tell you how many good friends of mine who otherwise in their economics or in their chemistry or physics are full of rigor. But the moment you talk about climate, they'll bring their anecdotal experience. Nobody will say, "I don't know." That's the first problem. Second problem is attribution is difficult. And attribution is, technically you distinguish between what is called detection and attribute. Detection is the detection of major changes in behavior, okay, in some attribute or variable. Attribution, however, is to causally connect it to climate change. And to some extent that is possible only counterfactually. So it depends on, you must have a model of how it would have been without climate change, and then what is the impact of climate change. And so in places like if you take temperature in India, heat waves, etc., their attribution can be fairly reliable. But of course, local conditions will also matter. That year, El Nino or La Nina. But altogether, you can make a picture. Precipitation will be much more complicated because precipitation is inherently very problematic in any case. And the monsoon, we are making progress, but there are still a lot of gaps. And quite respected people have different views. So attribution in precipitation is very difficult. And real extremes we can maybe do better. But if you say, take a large-scale flood, okay, with not necessarily a super storm behind it, large-scale flood, say flooding from Michok. to do a similar exercise was done in UK for large scale flooding some 7-8 years ago. They had a distributed computing across thousands of home computers to try and do the computing required to make the attribution. So, Micham, can you do the attribution? I think very complicated. Should you try even, or should you actually focus on preventing flooding? So just say, okay, suppose I get so much rainfall. Okay, so, am I prepared to deal with it? Or if I am not prepared to deal with it, is there some contingency contingency planning which will enable me to deal with it? So you need to think this, because obviously you cannot build infrastructure for all possibilities. Then you will spend infinite money. That's not possible. But then what is the safe limit? And what are low cost options? One of the most common things in Chennai we should learn is our plinth height must be higher. If you look at the flooding data in the NSSO across slums, etc., in that housing thing they have, you will see that flooding, one of the most common variables affecting the propensity to flood is plinth height. So there are ways to do it. So attribution is tricky. We must invest in it. But as lay people, we must resist the urge to substitute scientific attribution by anecdote. Having said that, it is very good. Everybody is tempted, including my best friend.
Okay, is there any other question?
One question on YouTube.
I'll
forward it to you.
Okay, you can ask.
WhatsApp.
Sir, the topic is on COP28 and the challenges, fossil fuels and the challenges. What are the challenges related to the sustainability as a field? It has been addressed in this.
As a field.
Yes, sir, COP28, sustainability related to fossil fuels.
See, one thing is, so I said it in one language, I say it again in another language, but two things I want to remind you of. There were two declarations India did not sign at COP. One was a declaration on climate change.
Tripling the.
No. Oh, actually there were three. But let me put it. One, there was a declaration on climate change and agriculture. India didn't sign. There was a declaration on climate change and health, which also we didn't sign. Okay? Why didn't we sign these? Now, the reason we didn't sign these two, because in both of them, the way it was portrayed, okay, was that mitigation and adaptation are equivalent responsibilities for all countries. So they talked about mitigation of the health supply chain. So wherever the word system appeared, India had a problem. Now, the point is like saying the responsibility for emissions, if you talk of the agri-food system, it appears that Walmart, Reliance, Fresh and the small farmers are all equal players. And all these the companies across the world and our big corporates also, which are promising net zero left, right and center, are all assuming that they will get carbon credits from the farmer. So how can you accept this? So whatever our domestic policy, we are not going to make any international commitments on it. So what is sustainability mean to us? So sustainability means to us low carbon development, essential where we cannot substitute for carbon and fossil fuels, we will continue to use, especially in the energy sector. But at every step, you try to see that the low carbon alternatives, if they are within reach economically, then we will pursue them. So a roadmap, roughly speaking, of what it looks like for India particular is available in India's low carbon development strategy. It is called India's LTLED, long-term low emissions development strategy. This is a document officially submitted by India to the UNFCCC. So it's like a formal commitment we have made about the way our vision of development is there. And sustainability is within this framework. So if there is new technology, if there is new science, if there is financial assistance, see, for instance, you want to have a zero emission health system. Wonderful. Are you going to have electric ambulances everywhere? If somebody gives me the money to have electric ambulances, then somebody gives me the money to have all those batteries, then somebody gives me the money to replace these batteries every 5 to 7 years, then I'll be happy to do it. Even then, I don't think it's a good idea, but at least in principle, I will consider it. So these are some of the parameters. So there is no single bullet, black and white answer, but you have to look at the overall picture. Yes.
Two more questions, one there and one
Yeah,
here.
this is a YouTube question.
So then you can finish.
Can you please explain to us green transportation?
Ayo. See,
One line.
see, there are, see, what is one major problem? Okay, you can read a lot about green finance in the media or on YouTube or on the net, etc. I'm not going to repeat it, but I'm going to tell you 2 or 3 things you must be careful about as an Indian living in a developing country. So, first, green cannot mean the same to a citizen of UK and us. Okay? Because we are just not in the same bracket. So for them, green means decarbonizing. Inga carbonize, we are uncarbonized. We are not decarbonizing. So for us, it is low carbon growth. So unfortunately, what is happening in green financing is that there is a big fight over a clause in the Paris Agreement called Article 2.1c. So first line of 2.1a is the temperature goal, 1.5. The 2.1b is about adaptation, and 2.1c says aligning financial flow to achieve the goals of A and C. So what does the United States say? United States says, we will not give any money, we will not allow World Bank or ADB or anyone to give any money to any developing country to have any fossil fuel infrastructure. So Nigeria exports gas to Europe, but if Nigeria wants to provide gas at home to their citizens, and they want to set up a pipeline, etc., they will not get funding. So where did they close the first thermal power plant? The World Bank back of Bangladesh. US, they don't need World Bank money. So this is the problem. So green finance, you must see through this. And of course, green finance is good in some areas like our MSME, medium and small scale enterprises. If they can get finance to improve their energy efficiency, which is our first target, before actual emissions reduction, then certainly this is something we should encourage. So the label is not so much important as how the finance is raised. You should not become that there is with the green finance, we also get green tech. No, all countries become green instead of white indebtedness or black indebtedness. Now you get green indebtedness. That's not a benefit. So these are all issues to think of.
So,
Yes.
this is the last question from YouTube.
Yeah.
It's from MP Swaminathan Kumar. We should call, he says that the common people don't understand the significance of 1.5 degree rise. And second one, he says that we should call it as 1,500 milli-degree rise or 1,500 danger degree rise.
Okay, that's all slogans.
Yes.
But I think there's a very easy way to make people understand 1.5 degree, especially in the United States. You say, in order to reach 1.5 degree, what are all the things you must give up? Now. Okay? So, our own citizens sometimes don't read this 1.5 document. Who has looked at 1.5 the net zero for Chennai? Young Varla? Oh, you must look at the net zero for Chennai. If you look at the emissions, there is no rise of emission from 2 years ago. You think it is possible? You think it is going to happen? So this is what, so 1.5, that's why the carbon budget is so important. Everything you do will have an emissions cost. You have to total this. And this keeps happening. Okay, and it adds up. So then, you figure out how much you can contribute to reducing you as a country. Then we can think about you as whatever state or society you belong. And then you as a
Okay, there's somebody finally raised. Okay, I don't want to stop. Okay.
Thank you for the lecture. I have a doubt. So we have this targets and deadlines and all. So is there anything like how accountability works? One,
Okay.
and another is if there is any violation or if there is any deviation from the pledge or commitment, is there any sanction or something? Or were there any discussions regarding it?
Very interesting question. Short answer is none. However, there is, however, some degree of naming and shaming. Okay, people don't like to be. So, for instance, when our Prime Minister or Minister of some substantial ranking, senior minister goes to some international conference, and they don't always go, as they say, empty-handed. Okay. So, you decide what is it you can contribute. And I think that is correct. As a country, as a society, we can't be saying no all the time. But again, then the question is it fair? Is it equitable? But the current situation, why we are in this mess, is a much more interesting history. I can't say all of it now. You have to look it up on the internet. There are many sources. But you see, when the UNFCCC was being signed, people wanted legally binding commitment. And that came in the Kyoto Protocol. So Japan, however, was the only country, not country, but it made a suggestion saying, let us have pledge and review, which is exactly the Paris Agreement. Everybody made fun of Japan, and it was castigated as hedge and retreat. Okay? But and in Durban in 2011, after Cancun in 2010, there was this famous confrontation where our own Jayaraman T was cornered because he was Minister for Youth and India didn't want a legally binding commitment. So it was added that everybody will work towards a treaty with with an instrument which is legally binding or of equal legal force, something jargon they took. You know what happened? Even that did not happen. So even the agreement which was made at Durban to have some kind of binding commitment was not made. And so the Paris Agreement is binding on process and not on commitment. And this is explicitly because the United States would not have been able to ratify the agreement. So that is, so we are where we are. The Kyoto Protocol, they all walked out. They had legally binding commitment. I think India, at that stage, I felt that India should also offer through the carbon budget a legally binding, some form of legal binding commitment. But that water has flown down the Kuam long back. Okay, so we are where we are.
Okay.